What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny and Bush coming at you with our must-draft players by round. Basically, what we're going to be going through over the next couple Saturdays is today we're going to be going through rounds 1 to 4, talking about our favorite ADP values in each round, who we're targeting currently at value based on our own rankings. So in our own rankings, we have our overall rankings, which you can access in our draft guide. And based on their current ADP, who do we see as a value in that round, and therefore who's a target as a result of that? So Danny, how you doing today?
Doing well. And yeah, the main thing that caught me off guard is how many players we had ahead of consensus when conducting this experiment. And looking through it, people want to say, oh, you don't win your draft in the first few rounds, you win it in the later rounds. Nah, because if you can take advantage of some of these ADPs that are currently at store for you in those first 4 rounds, like we're going to go through in this video, you can easily assemble a pure value start to your drafts. And that is just going to put you so much ahead of the rest of your competition. So I'm excited and eager to get into it. And yeah, it's going to be a very fun video to conduct, and it should be a very valuable video for you guys to take into your drafts for this year.
For sure. So if you guys do receive any value from this video, we say something that you never thought of, maybe go ahead and like the video, comment down below any of your thoughts, maybe your favorite players in each round of the ADP. You can give us your own list. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. We're trying to get to 5,000 subscribers as soon as possible. So if you haven't already done so, hit the subscribe button. We considered doing this exercise in our draft guide, like writing up an article of our favorite values by round, but we figured, screw it. Let's do it in video format so that you guys can get all the value from it. So we're going to hit the intro and then we're going to get right into this. Okay, so we are going to be using Underdog Fantasy ADP. As always, Underdog is the most sharp, the most up-to-date, and the most accurate ADP out there. So that is the ADP we'll be using. Obviously, this probably goes without saying, but if somebody in the round 1 ADP is available in round 2, then that would obviously make them a value as well, depending on the player. So anybody that you see in the round 1 ADP, if you're in round 3 of your fantasy draft and they're in round 3 or round 2, mid-round 2 or something, then they would obviously be a value, in general. But we're looking over these ADPs right now. Currently, we're going to be picking our favorite value each, and then we're going to be talking about an honorable mention that maybe just missed the cut. So basically 3 of our best values in each round. So Danny, kick us off with your favorite value in round 1. You guys should see the round 1 ADP on the screen right now.
Yeah, and obviously, again, round 1 is going to be the hardest round to truly find that elite edge in terms of where we have them ranked versus where the ADP has them ranked. But a guy that I'm looking at that really caught my eye. Again, your guy's going to catch my eye in particular as well. He was my overall highest raiser, but my second highest raiser is going to be Davante Adams, and he's currently ranked off the board as the wide receiver 1, 7th overall player. I currently have him as the wide receiver 1, but 5th overall. And the reason of that is we saw Davante Adams last year genuinely break fantasy football from the wide receiver position. I mean, this is a guy in 13 and a half games played, had 18 receiving touchdowns, is attached to, in my opinion, a top 2 quarterback in football, which we'll get into later in this argument. And he averaged 21 and a half PPR points per game, which, if you're actually looking at it, was the 4th highest total amongst non-quarterbacks, only trailing Dalvin Cook, Christian McCaffrey, and I think it was Alvin Kamara. That's it. Only trailing Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, and Alvin Kamara. I mean, this is a guy that is as consistent as they come at the wide receiver position. He represents the elite volume that we were talking about going into the year last year with Michael Thomas. People want to load Michael Thomas as the wide receiver 1. Well, Davante Adams is everything that we wanted Michael Thomas to be, except he also gets elite volume in the red zone. We're talking about a guy, 13 inside the 5 targets last year, 36 targets in the red zone in 13 and a half games. I mean, Aaron Rodgers, as soon as they get into the red zone, it's either going to Aaron Jones, as you're going to get into, or it's going to go into Davante Adams total. And it's just remarkable when you think what he does as both a volume play as well as a touchdown upside play. And in my opinion, gives you the same type of advantage at the wide receiver position as even a McCaffrey does at running back. Obviously not to the same magnitude, considering that McCaffrey is probably the best fantasy football asset we'll see in this generation. But in terms of the wide receiver position, this is legitimately a receiver that was averaging over 3 points per game more than any other player at his position last year. And the fact that you can get that type of value in your mid-first round, look, 7 to 5 doesn't seem like a huge jump, but I genuinely believe outside of my personal top 4 running backs, he is my number 1 target off the board after that.
Yeah, totally. And I think, like you said, in any kind of PPR league, you could even lean him over some of the running backs at the top of the draft that don't catch a lot of passes, namely Derrick Henry, right? Like that is the big discussion in a full PPR league. Let's say you're in a full PPR league. Do you take Devontae Adams or Derrick Henry? I would argue that you take Devontae Adams because, call me crazy, I think they're going to have similar touchdown totals this year, which is crazy to say for a guy like Derrick Henry versus a guy like Devontae Adams. One's a running back, one's a wide receiver, but this is legitimately the fourth year of the last 5 that Devontae Adams has had double-digit touchdowns. And he had 18 touchdowns, like you said, in 13 and a half games. And pretty much nothing has changed. Everybody's returning. It's very reasonable to project Devontae Adams has a floor of 10 to 12 touchdowns. And then a ceiling, obviously, 15 plus 20 touchdowns potentially.
Yeah, and I know I alluded to it before, but with Aaron Rodgers' return, we should see this Packers offense not only pick up to where they were, but I do believe that they're going to have a little bit of an edge to their game. They're going to play with that season, knowing that this may very well be the last season that they're all connected together. And let's be honest here, a guy of Devontae Adams' talent and volume doesn't need any more added motivation. So I am perfectly fine making him my first drafted player. And honestly, I personally have my top 4 running backs at the top of my draft. I could even make a case even after McCaffrey and Cook. He has a case for 103. I genuinely believe that. Now, I personally would go with Kamara, but if you're in a full PPR and you're debating it, I think this is the only player outside of those running backs that has a case to enter that top elite tier of fantasy football for your draft season. So I absolutely love Devontae Adams, and I think if you get him in your lineup, you're not going to be regretting it whatsoever because this is a guy that legitimately, at the least scarce position that people want to say, was giving you the scarcity advantage of a running back, of a tight end, of a quarterback, because that is just how much better he was than the rest of the field.
Yeah, and that includes guys like Diggs and Hopkins who are phenomenal, right? And like I said, Devontae Adams is an Antonio Brown level wide receiver asset. What we saw from Antonio Brown, his prime, is exactly what we're seeing from Devontae Adams right now. So yeah, I totally agree with the pick. I also have him at 5 overall, as do you. So I'm right on board with you there. And we're going to stay on the Green Bay Packers because the other first round value that both of us actually have significantly higher. I have him at 7 overall. I think do you have him at 7 or 8?
Let me just check right now. But he is my 7th overall as well.
Yeah, okay, so that's Aaron Jones, right? So he's currently going off the board as the RB7 11th overall pick, about 11.4 overall in terms of Underdog ADP. This is a guy that has everything out in front of him to have his best season of his career as well. He's only a guy that received 218.5 carries on average over the last 2 years. So if anybody is worried about A.J. Dillon eating into his carry volume, this wasn't a guy that was getting 350 carries a year. This was a guy that was being managed on the ground from a ground perspective. They used Jamal Williams. They used A.J. Dillon last year. They're going to continue to use Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon in tandem on the ground. But the big upgrade for Aaron Jones is the departure of Jamal Williams in the passing game. And 35 or 38 targets, whatever Jamal Williams had last year, doesn't seem like a lot of vacated production, so to speak. But the fact that Jamal Williams ran 201 routes, Aaron Jones ran 253 last year. So they were almost splitting that, 55-45 in terms of that third down role and that role in the red zone as a receiver. And when you look at what Aaron Jones has as an upside this year, he legitimately has Alvin Kamara, maybe not Christian McCaffrey because he's just a freak of nature, but like Saquon Barkley, Alvin Kamara, 90 to 110 target type of upside this year because Jamal Williams is gone and A.J. Dillon is virtually a 0 in the passing game. He can contribute as if you set up a screenplay for him, but that's about it. That's all he can really do as a receiver. He's a good runner of the football, but not going to contribute much on third down. And no running back last year or over the last 2 years has more red zone targets at running back than Aaron Jones's 24 over the last 2 seasons. So this is a guy that not only does he get he's going to see more targets this year, he gets very valuable targets because Aaron Rodgers trusts him. And again, he has a quarterback who's going to be was the MVP last year, is a very accurate quarterback, a very efficient quarterback. And this offense is predicated on the run. It's predicated on getting the ball to Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams in the passing game. This situation is set up for Aaron Jones to have a monster season this year and probably even provide a little bit more consistency than we've seen from Aaron Jones in the past. I think the big concern with a lot of people is going to be the touchdown volume because of what A.J. Dillon represents. He's a big back. They might use him on the goal line. But to be honest with you, I think he's going to be used on the goal line just as much as Jamal Williams was. I think Jamal Williams' involvement on the goal line was enough. Like they did use him on the goal line last year. And in the red zone in general. So I don't think Aaron Jones's role changes much from that perspective. The big uptick is in the receiving game, and that's where he gets his ceiling from. And of course, we all know he's a great player, so he's going to break off a number of big runs and things of that nature. And the offense is going to be so good, and the offensive line so good that he's going to be efficient from that perspective. So Aaron Jones is a guy I absolutely love at the back of the first round.
Yeah, and when you're talking about Aaron Jones, I know you mentioned, okay, maybe A.J. Dillon might siphon some red zone touches, might siphon some goal line touches, but as you mentioned, that should be counterbalanced by the fact that he should receive that uptick in receiving volume. So when we're actually talking about that, what that uptick could look like, I know Jack Miller actually tweeted this out recently, but Aaron Jones's underdog ADP versus his half PPR points per game, he was RB3 in 2019 and RB5 in points per game last year. So already you're getting a value based on what he's done the previous 2 years versus his ADP this year. But then when you combine that with the fact that Jamal Williams has never had a season with less than 25 receptions, and A.J. Dillon has had 23 total receptions over his last 4 seasons, college and NFL combined, it just goes to show that the opportunity here to dip into that receiving total that Jamal Williams was taken from him is absolutely there for Aaron Jones to exploit. So I don't understand how he's making it to the back end of the first round currently. In all honesty, I mean, this is the definition of a league-winning potential running back, and you're getting him at the 11th overall pick on Underdog right now.
And he's one of the rare running backs too. And the reason I have him over some of the more risky running backs like Antonio Gibson, Najee Harris is I think he's very safe too. I don't want to take safety in the first round because you want to shoot for that huge upside. But Aaron Jones has both. He has the safety and the huge upside, which is really rare to see. Only really like in terms of safety, the only guys that I can project very strong roles for ahead of Aaron Jones are Christian McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry, right? Like those are the only 3 running backs I see in the first round because we have questions to some extent about Alvin Kamara's involvement. If Taysom Hill's the starter, we have questions to some extent about Saquon Barkley's involvement because he's coming off of an injury. So from a role perspective and what I expect on volume and involvement in the offense, Aaron Jones is like the 4th safest running back in the first round. I think he has just as much upside as pretty much anybody outside of Christian McCaffrey. Saquon Barkley is our honorable mention for the first round because he's currently going off the board as the 10th overall player right now and going off the board as the RB6. Saquon Barkley, yes, is probably a value, right? If Saquon Barkley comes back and he's Saquon, he's going to be a huge value, and he definitely would have been my pick for this, but he is coming with a lot of risk right now. So I feel a lot better about Aaron Jones being a value than I do Saquon Barkley, although I do think Saquon Barkley is undervalued to some extent. So another guy that I think even if he's 75% the first couple weeks, he should be absolutely worth that 10th overall pick. And it reminds me, like I've said before, a lot of what Dalvin Cook's situation was. The discount that you were getting on Dalvin Cook last year is what I see with Saquon Barkley. So he's the honorable mention of the first round ADP in terms of who's the best value there and the must draft player that we see in that round.
Yeah, and quickly looking over the rest of that first round, the rest of the players realistically line up with where we currently have them ranked. So I do think that the first round is kind of set for the most part, aside from the players we just mentioned, in terms of where they should be drafted. We could talk about maybe Derrick Henry being a little lower than he currently is, but aside from that, I think it's a perfect order, apart from the 2 guys we mentioned and Saquon Barkley.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So let's move on to the round 2 of ADP, and you guys should be able to see that on the screen there. I'm not going to read it off or anything, but Danny's got Antonio Gibson on the docket, right? So Antonio Gibson currently going off the board as the RB11, 17th overall pick. So like the mid-second round is where you have to draft Antonio Gibson. So where do you have him ranked, and why is he a value at this point?
Yeah, I'm significantly higher on Antonio Gibson comparatively to consensus. He's currently my RB8 overall, 12th overall player. And as you guys would have seen on the screen, he's currently going off the board as the 17th overall selection, RB11 in Underdog Fantasy, which is a remarkable discrepancy when you consider I am currently 5 overall spots higher on Antonio Gibson. I have him as a first round pick. They have him as more of a mid-second rounder. And listen, I cannot get enough of Antonio Gibson this offseason. You guys have heard multiple videos of me absolutely bickering on the fact that this guy has the league-winning upside we look for when taking a top 2 round pick running back. And obviously, we've referenced the Pat Crane article already, but if you guys haven't read it, it is one of the best reads that you can possibly do in preparing for your fantasy football drafts. But basically, he says that you need a running back to have legitimate 20-plus point per game potential if you're considering taking them in the top 2 rounds, which I personally believe Antonio Gibson has. Again, this was a guy who was the RB12 overall last year, RB15 on points per game, despite having almost a 0 role on third down. 1 total snap on third down in weeks 1 to 10, and he didn't run a single route on third down in the whole season. So What are your thoughts on Antonio Gibson? Because I know you're also bullish on him. I just don't want to take up the whole fucking time on him.
Dude, I'm literally higher on him than you are. I have him
Are you?
as my 11th overall player. He's my RB8
Wow.
also, but I have him as my 11th overall player. So he's a guy that I love, man. I love everything about him. Way back when we talked about him last offseason in the Top Sleepers video, that's the highest viewed video on this channel. And when they released Adrian Peterson, they talked about the fact that they wanted Antonio Gibson to be the guy. They wanted him to be the pony style runner like Christian McCaffrey. And that's exactly what Adrian Peterson said when they left. And I wrote an article in June or May or whatever, talking about how I think Antonio Gibson's the next Christian McCaffrey. And the fact that he was able to be the RB11 or RB12, like he was like the RB7 or 8 in the before he suffered the turf toe injury against the Steelers in that time that he was healthy. And like you said, he wasn't involved on third down. This was the number 32 offense in offensive DVOA in terms of offensive efficiency last year. And he was really a 2-down banger for their team. So the fact that he could be that and be the RB12 last year in finish, he has so much room to grow, and he's currently being drafted as if he's going to do what he did last year.
Yep, absolutely. And just adding to that, he is getting the same type of training camp buzz as we saw a couple years ago. I remember going into the offseason in 2018, everybody was saying, well, is this going to be a timeshare? Is CJ Anderson going to chip into Christian McCaffrey? And then we saw in the preseason when Christian McCaffrey got 95% of the first team snaps. Okay, never mind. That was a complete fugazi this whole offseason. I think people are still trying to fit the same thing with Antonio Gibson and J.D. McKissic, when in reality, J.P. Finley, a respected lead reporter for the Washington football team, has already gone out and said that this team is looking to completely change their offensive identity from where it was at last year. I mean, we saw last year, J.D. McKissic and Logan Thomas combined for 220 targets. What did the team do? They went out inside elite playmaking talent. They signed Curtis Samuel to play their slot. They drafted De'Ami Brown, our wide receiver 6. They want this team to scare defenses and get the balls into their efficient playmakers' hands. And Antonio Gibson, apart from maybe Terry McLaurin as a pure talent, is that next driving force of this overall offense. And this team has talked him up all offseason, as I've said. Running backs coach Randy Jordan has said that Antonio Gibson's improvement in year 2 is like night and day. And Washington head coach Ron Rivera says he expects a big jump from Antonio Gibson in 2021, which, if you don't remember, Ron Rivera was the exact same head coach that Christian McCaffrey had when he had his breakout year. So Antonio Gibson is that upside back we're looking for. And you can currently pair him with like Aaron Jones in the first round, Tyreek Hill in the first round. Maybe if Devontae Adams falls to you in the first round, like the potential is endless for, if you're picking at that back of the first round, to be able to provide, in my opinion, 2 elite difference-making options given their current ADP. So Gibson, fire pick. You can't leave your second rounds without this guy on your team.
Yeah, and Danny's going to get me in a lot of shit in my home league because I'm picking at 9th. I want Aaron Jones at 9, and I want Antonio Gibson on the way back. That's exactly the start. That's the dream start for me. So hopefully none of my league mates are listening to me right now, especially not a couple of them that pick in between me in that area, because I hope they don't take them from me. But yeah, Antonio Gibson, everything he said. J.D. McKissic to me was a contingency last year. The reason he played such a big role is because Antonio Gibson wasn't really ready to play a big role yet. He's talked about the fact that he really had no idea how to run the ball. This was a wide receiver in college. He had no idea how to run patiently and develop his blocks and stuff like that. And you could see that if you go back and watch the film. You can see Antonio Gibson learn that as the season went on. And when it comes to a receiving workload, you need to be able to trust the guy in pass protection. This was legitimately a guy with 0 snaps in pass protection in college because Kenneth Gainwell was the primary running back there. He took all those snaps and he was actually very good in pass protection. So Antonio Gibson, if he can improve in pass protection, improve his role on third down, should have a monster second season. And I totally agree with the 2018 Christian McCaffrey comparison. That is exactly what I see out of Antonio Gibson in his second year. And I think the Washington football team offense is much better than the Panthers was in 2018.
Absolutely agree. And I've said it before, but I wouldn't at all be shocked if we're looking at this guy going into 2022 fantasy drafts as a consensus top 5 overall running back, top 5 overall pick option. I genuinely see that type of potential with Antonio Gibson. But anyways, we can get into your pick in the second round. Who is your second round player?
Yeah, and we legitimately have debated these guys on a video before. Me and Ron Stewart did a video called Antonio Gibson versus who? Najee Harris. Najee Harris is the other guy that I see as a must-draft player in the second round. Since we did that video, I've really warmed up to Najee Harris for a couple reasons. One, Currently, Najee Harris is going off the board as the RB13, 21 overall. So this is a guy that you're getting towards the back end of the second round. Currently in my rankings, he's my RB9. He's my 12th overall player. So this is a guy that I would take at the back of the first round. So what you get with Najee Harris is, and I'll pull this tweet up from Mike Tagliere. Basically, he says, do you concede that Najee Harris will get 18.7 or more touches per game, regardless of their O-line? He's like, if your answer is yes, go to step 2. If your answer is no, redo step 1. So there were 66 running backs who've totaled 300 plus touches over the last 10 years. 64 of them finish as the RB13 or better. And then he basically says, see Najee Harris's ADP is lower than that and draft Najee Harris. And we're not volume is king guys. You guys know that about us. If you followed the channel, we're not volume is king guys, but here's the thing that makes Najee Harris's volume not what I like to call bad volume. One, Najee Harris is going to get so much volume that it almost doesn't matter, right? It's like James Robinson's volume last year. But two, Najee Harris, unlike James Robinson, is an extremely talented running back. He was my RB2 in the class. I had a first-round grade on him. He was your RB1 in the class. We both had first-round grades on him. He went in the first round of the NFL draft, similar to the grades that we had, and he's extremely capable as a receiver. And that's the big, big difference between bad volume from some running backs versus bad volume from others, especially if your offensive line is bad like the Steelers is. But here's the thing. The Steelers' offensive line was the worst in the NFL last year in terms of run blocking. They can't get worse than they were last year. So the new scheme Matt Canada is going to be running there is a lot more friendly to the offensive line. It's a zone blocking scheme. It's not archaic like what the Steelers were running before. So it should make their offensive line slightly more efficient than it was in the past. But again, even if we assume this is a bottom 5 offensive line, I think it is. Look at Mike Tomlin's starting running back opportunities per game since 2013. We have James Conner over the past couple of years, 18.66 opportunities, 16.1 in 2019. He had a number of games where he was banged up in. 2018, 23.18. And then Le'Veon Bell's career consistently over 23, sometimes up to 30 opportunities per game. And even when Le'Veon Bell was out in 2015, D'Angelo Williams, 22 opportunities per game. This is a coach that loves to use workhorse running backs. And I don't think it matters to him that he's going to be featuring Najee Harris because he's on a rookie contract. He's going to use him up and then not re-sign him. We saw it with Le'Veon Bell. I think the exact same thing is going to happen with Najee Harris. First round draft capital from a coach who uses workhorse backs. The system that he's playing in, that wide zone scheme that Matt Canada is going to install, is the same system that Steve Sarkisian ran at Alabama. It includes getting Najee Harris out in space and getting him the ball as a receiver. It includes Najee Harris running a lot of outside zone, a lot of inside zone, so he can take advantage of his vision and his patience and his elusiveness. And we've already seen in the Hall of Fame game, his very first run, I think he made like 3 guys miss on it pretty much. So to me, another big factor, and this is the last thing I'll say about Najee Harris, is the fact that he is a very, very easy schedule. And we talked about it in the running back strength of schedule video, but he legitimately has the easiest schedule of any running back in the NFL. And especially when you look at those first couple games, the Steelers' offensive line is bad. But the Bills front, the Raiders front, the Bengals front, do they scare you for Najee Harris? They don't scare me. And like I said, even if he is inefficient on the ground, 4.1, 4.2 yards a carry or something like that, this is a guy that should have 80-plus targets his rookie season. In Le'Veon Bell's rookie season, he was probably a far worse prospect in the fact that he had lower draft capital. He still saw 250 carries and over 65 targets. So I think 300 opportunities is the bare minimum for Najee Harris if he can play more than 13 games. And Le'Veon Bell played 13 games his rookie season, still got 310 opportunities. So overall, Najee Harris, yes, the volume is there, the talent is there. If the Steelers' offensive line can just be formidable, the schedule should help with that. This guy's going to return RB1 value and probably top 5 RB value as well.
Yeah, no, definitely in the range of outcomes for him to be a top 5 back. And in all honesty, when I'm forecasting what Najee Harris's 2021 season could look like, man, I keep looking back to the what David Montgomery did this year. And I think it could be a comparable season. I mean, we're looking at a guy in 15 games, 247 rushing attempts, 68 targets, which if paced out to a 16-game sample size would be 73 targets on the year. And he produced 10 total touchdowns, 1,500 yards from scrimmage, and ended up being a 15.9 half PPR point per game score. I mean, this is not bad volume that Najee Harris is getting. And I think from a talent level, he's more talented than David Montgomery and should have even more receiving volume. So overall,
I didn't even mention the fact that Ben Roethlisberger, and I've compared Najee Harris' situation to Saquon's rookie year before. Ben Roethlisberger's at the end of his career. He is a very immobile quarterback. There's a chance that he just chucks the ball to Najee Harris constantly, especially if this offensive line is bad. We could see something similar to what we saw from the Giants in 2018 in Saquon's rookie year when he had over 100 targets.
Yeah, especially when you consider his best intermediate threat apart from Najee Harris is just, a fourth percentile route runner against man coverage. So yeah, Juju Smith-Schuster's complete trash. But anyways, yeah, no, I fully agree on Najee Harris. I think where you're currently getting him the mid-second round is very appropriate. And say you start with the Devontae Adams and you're in a PPR league and you can get Najee Harris as your RB1 in the second round, I think that's a very good value pick at that point.
Right. So the honorable mention, the last guy that we'll talk about in this second round range is Jonathan Taylor. Obviously, we have some concern around Jonathan Taylor, similar to the way that we have it about Saquon Barkley. Jonathan Taylor is going about in the early to mid second round range, around where you're getting Antonio Gibson. I'm still willing to pick Jonathan Taylor there. I know you're still willing to pick Jonathan Taylor there because of the carry volume that this guy is going to see. I know not having Quentin Nelson is a big deal because he's their best offensive lineman, and Jonathan Taylor needs efficiency on the ground in order to be a good fantasy pick because he's not somebody that's going to get 80 plus targets or anything like that because Nyheim Hines still is there. But this is a guy that's going to have a monopoly on the goal line, more or less. This is a guy that can take any play to the house with his huge speed, his huge physical stature, and the way that he runs the ball. So Jonathan Taylor, to me, if their quarterback, if their left guard is out, they might lean a little bit more on the run early in the season. He's still a guy that I'm willing to pick in the second round. And I think a lot of people have made the point that maybe he shouldn't have been going in the first round in the first place. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think he should have been a first round pick, but to get him in the mid second, you're basically removing all that baked in risk that he had in the first round anyways.
Yep. No, I absolutely agree on Jonathan Taylor. And the way I view Jonathan Taylor is like a Nick Chubb, but with, let's say, 25% more of the target upside. I think that's a fair assessment. Where
I think he has more more big play potential than Nick Chubb too, and that's not to slight Nick Chubb because he's very good in that regard too. But Jonathan Taylor and Saquon Barkley are the two biggest play threats in the NFL at running back.
Yeah, no, I could definitely see that. So we can move on to the third round. You guys can see the ADP on the screen, and my pick is going to be a little bit of a disagreement between myself and Bush, but that has more so to do with my personal preference of structure with the tight end position versus Bush preferring the running back and wide receiver position. So completely makes sense. My value is actually going to be George Kittle, currently the tight end 3 in ADP, 27th overall pick. My tight end 3, but I have him as my 19th overall player on the board. And while it seems high on the surface, 19th overall player, oh my God, you have him as a mid-second round pick. I get that. But from a structural standpoint, as I mentioned, I really enjoy having an anchor tight end because for me, it opens up the flexibility to go with best available running back, best available wide receiver in those mid to late rounds where people are scrambling to find a mediocre tight end option. And don't get me wrong, it's not just from a structural standpoint because when you're looking at George Kittle, he is an absolute baller in his own rights. And sometimes I just think we fail to remember just how historically good this guy is, because from a recency bias perspective, he got hurt, only played 6 games last year. I get that. But this is a tight end that has averaged over 75 receiving yards per game in each of the last 3 seasons. You guys see that on the screen. In 2020, 12.6 half PPR points per game, which was the tight end 3. 2019, 12.9 half PPR points per game, which was the tight end 2. In 2018, he was 13.4 half PPR points per game, which was the tight end 3 over the last 3 seasons. So when he is on the field, you are consistently getting a top 3 overall tight end and a huge advantage from the rest of the field, because if you're actually comparing it, those numbers I just mentioned had a 3.2 point advantage over tight end 5 last year, a 1.5 tight end point per game advantage over tight end 5 in 2019, and a 3.4 point per game advantage over tight end 5 in 2018. So when you're comparing those splits, they're remarkable. I mentioned it with Devontae Adams having that split over the next best wide receiver. That's basically kind of what George Kittle represents from tight end 2 to tight end 5 in terms of the split. So as you can see, it's clearly an advantage to have that anchor tight end. And this year in particular, I truly believe it's harder to spot the next breakout tight end as it has been in previous years. Because in previous years, you found your George Kittle late. You found your Darren Waller late. You found your Mark Andrews late. I think this year in particular, though, I don't necessarily see that option in later rounds. So therefore, I would rather just get my anchor right away and build my late rounds around guys that I think can break out at the wide receiver and running back position. So I understand it's not going to be the favorite of most people, but for me, give me George Kittle at the end of the second, early third round any day of the week.
Right. And you mentioned there's not a lot of late round tight end options this year. To me, my range of tight end that I'm more comfortable targeting is that second tier, is the Kyle Pitts, the TJ Hawkinson, the Mark Andrews. And I also don't mind the third tier of tight ends with Fant, Goddard, Tyler Higbee, and Robert Tonyan. I like those guys as well. So I'm more so going to stick to those tight ends because I do think once you get outside the third, fourth round, we see a pretty big drop off in wide receiver talent. I don't think anybody really outside of that range has like top 3 overall upside. I think once you get outside of that range, you're talking about guys like Jerry Jeudy and you're talking about DJ Charks and Laviska Shenault and players of that nature. And I think when you're comparing TJ Hawkinson to those guys, it makes it a lot easier to stomach when I'm comparing George Kittle to guys like Keenan Allen. Like I physically can't pass on a guy like Keenan Allen. I can't pass on a guy like DeAndre Swift or J.K. Dobbins at running back, David Montgomery potentially as well, for a guy like George Kittle, who I'm not denying the fact that this guy's going to be efficient. I don't really have concerns about George Kittle. I don't think he's going to be, low targets because the offense is going to go more run heavy when trade. Like I know people are going to make that argument. It's not a concern for me. I understand George Kittle is going to be phenomenal when he's on the field. Even if he only gets 110 targets, 107 targets like he got in 2019, this is still a guy that's going to be over 1,000-yard tight end because he's a huge play threat. He's going to be efficient and he has more touchdown upside than he ever has in his career so far. So yeah, it's nothing against the player. It's more so against who I have to pick him over. And that's why he's more of a pick in the 30s for me than he is a pick in the 20s like he is for you. I think you have at 19, you said.
19, yeah. Yeah. So for me, he's like, I currently have him. If you were to compare some of the pieces, I know you're probably going to disagree with some of these players, but I currently have him one spot ahead of Keenan, AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson in a row, and Joe Mixon would be my 23. So those are like the 5 players kind of in that 19 to 23 range for me. I personally would just go with Kittle because I like the structural build of having that elite tight end at the top of my draft.
Right. And I would take all those players over Kittle. And I would also take all those players ahead of Waller too, who's my tight end too. And I would agree. I would take Waller higher than Kittle, and I still wouldn't take Waller over those players. So that's where I'm at the tight end position again. If I can get these guys in the third round, early third round, mid third round, then I'm willing to do it. But the chances of me actually getting them there is probably pretty low. So I'm more or less going to be avoiding the top 3 tight ends as a result of that.
I will say, if you guys learn anything too, it's more likely you'll get these second tier tight ends in the third round of your casual leagues, because once you're in more sharper ADP drives, specifically Underdog, I mean, sometimes you see like Darren Waller going off the board as like the 2-2, George Kittle going off the board as the 2-5, like genuinely in those drafts. I mean, I've seen Travis Kelce go off the board as the 103 in some of them, in all honesty. You'll see in more sharper leagues that tight ends just fly off the board, but in your casual leagues, you could get a good amount of value. Like Travis Kelce might be a mid-second round pick. George Kittle and Darren Waller might be a mid-third round pick. And at that point, I mean, you're comparing George Kittle to, let's just say,
Cooper Kupp.
I was going to say even like Mike Evans. I would take Kittle over Mike Evans.
I would take Mike Evans over Kittle. But if you told me Tyler Lockett versus George Kittle, I would definitely take George Kittle there. If you told me Robert Woods versus George Kittle, I'd take George Kittle there. So that's about the range that I see it. It's a little bit different from Danny, but let's move on to the next player in the third round that we're going to be talking about here. And currently going off the board as the running back 1533 overall is DeAndre Swift. I currently have him as my RB 13, so 2 spots ahead of ADP and running backs, and then 22 overall. So I see him more so as a late second rounder as compared to a mid to late third rounder where he's currently going. And I've even gotten him in the 4th round sometimes because people are really scared of
it's nuts.
Scared of DeAndre Swift in general. So let's break down the whole situation. We've gone over this before, but I want to take a different angle towards it because Anthony Lynn, it initially started when Anthony Lynn called Jamal Williams his A-back, right? He compared him to his Melvin Gordon role. He's going to use him just as much as DeAndre Swift. It's going to be a 50-50 split, whatever people wanted to take away from it. His A-back is a primary ball carrier. It's not a 3-down guy. And Albert Breer was at Lions camp a couple days ago, and he tweeted this out. DeAndre Swift's going to be the bell cow, and having Jamal Williams around has helped the former second rounder take another big step forward, which to me was the big takeaway from that statement. He also said Williams is bringing more than expected in the passing game, so he could carve out a role, and that's to be expected. I expected Jamal Williams to be involved. I know everybody has this stigma where if our running back is not an 85-90% opportunity share running back, he's in a committee, but that's not how the NFL works. There's literally only like 3 or 4 running backs over the past 5 years that have received all of the opportunity in their backfield. And Christian McCaffrey is like 2 of them. So it's rare that you get that kind of that value. Some running back is going to be involved to some extent. And even on a bad offense, which is the other big concern that people have about the Detroit Lions, Swift's ability in the passing game is special. Like, it is legitimately special. If you don't believe me, go back and watch some of this guy's tape from 2020. In negative game scripts that he's going to be playing in, because again, this is going to be a bad team. They're not going to win 8-9 games. I think their ceiling is probably 6-7 wins this year. He should see near 100 targets this year. And I am certain that he's going to see that kind of target potential, because Jamal Williams will carve out a role on third down to some extent, but even in Green Bay, this was still a guy that only had like 35 targets last year. And in Green Bay, one of the most efficient offenses in the league last year, he was inefficient in his role, which it's because he's not that great of a player. He's not quite the elite athlete that DeAndre Swift is. He's not the elite receiving back that DeAndre Swift is. And when we look at the situation in Detroit, it's actually not that bad. I think people are projecting the Detroit Lions at their floor. I think they're expecting this to be the Jacksonville Jaguars, the New York Jets of last year. They're going to have 1 win. They're going to have 2 wins. Their offense can be a complete dumpster fire. But the way I look at the Detroit Lions is they have a great offensive line, like probably a top 10 offensive line in the league. Now that they've added Penei Sewell, this offensive line is going to open up holes for DeAndre Swift, and he's a talented runner, so he should be efficient from that perspective. Jared Goff is a better quarterback than what the Jets and what the Jaguars were working with last year. So I don't think Jared Goff is as bad as some people think. I think he's going to fit the system well, too. This is a New Orleans Saints type system that they're going to be running. Anthony Lynn's also coming in from the Chargers. So it's going to be a lot of short passing, a lot of easy plays for Jared Goff. And when we look at the Lions' weapons in general, they have a talented young running back in Swift. They have TJ Hawkinson and some of these receivers, if they can contribute. This offense, to me, could be a slightly below average offense. Could be like the 20th best offense in the league. And that is fine for a guy like DeAndre Swift. On top of all of that, the Lions ran the ball at a bottom 5 clip last year. That'll change even if they're playing from behind, because they were playing from behind last year. And the Los Angeles Chargers, who Anthony Lynn is coming from, won 7 games last year, and they ranked 9th in total rush attempts. So he doesn't care what the game script is. DeAndre Swift is their way to win games. They don't care that they're tanking, quote unquote, for a quarterback. They're going to use DeAndre Swift in a featured workload because coaches try and win. They don't try and tank. And Anthony Lynn and Dan Campbell have used these efficient receiving backs before. Of course, we know that Austin Eckler has been very good with Anthony Lynn, and we know that Alvin Kamara has been very good with Dan Campbell. So they're the framework for DeAndre Swift. And our friend Sexy Pats over at Owner's Box has also brought up this point. In games last year where DeAndre Swift had more than 10 rush attempts, he averaged 21.2 PPR points per game. All he needs is 15 to 20 opportunities. He does not need 25 to 30 carries a game.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree on DeAndre Swift. And it's funny you mentioned that stat with Kamara and Eckler, because I think I've referenced that Nathan Janke tweet legitimately like 10 times already this offseason. But it just goes to show, let's do the math right here. He brings in an offensive coach from the Saints, the head coach from the Chargers, and the 2 backs that led in 15-plus yard explosive catches last year just so happened to be the pass-catching running backs from both of those teams. If we do not think that DeAndre Swift's going to take a sizable leap in the receiving game, you're completely lying to yourself. I would be shocked if we're not looking at a 95-plus target back in the 17
He only ran like 45% of the routes on the Lions last year. He was a part-time player, and that's no slight to DeAndre Swift. He was a rookie running back. Like, he was not supposed to be on the field a crazy amount of time. But this year we're hearing differently from the coaching staff. Like Albert Breer said, he is the workhorse of this team, basically. He's going to be the primary back. Jamal Williams is, of course, going to spell him because that's what running backs do. They don't put any running back on the field on every single play unless your name is Christian McCaffrey. So overall, when you're looking for what you want out of a guy, he's very talented, and betting on talent is always the smartest thing to do in fantasy football in general. You're looking for targets. You're going to get them with DeAndre Swift. He's going to probably be among the league leaders in running back targets. The game script's going to prove that to be the case as well. And he's an elite receiving back from a talent perspective. The offensive line, like I said, is a very good unit. People don't want to give that credit. And 18.4 opportunities per game, which is what it took him to average those 21.2 PPR points per game, is not a lot to ask for. It reminds me a lot, like we said with Antonio Gibson, of second year of Christian McCaffrey, who played for a 7-win team, and his offensive line was not nearly the unit that the Detroit Lions have.
Yep. No, I absolutely agree. So our honorable mention of this round is going to be Keenan Allen. I mean, we kind of alluded to him when I was talking about George Kittle, but Keenan Allen is just severely misvalued by the community. And I don't understand it, because we saw last year when Justin Herbert was on the field and Keenan Allen was fully healthy, this was legitimately a near 13 target per game wide receiver. I know we say quote unquote, efficiency over volume, but when you're getting 13 targets per game and you're a consensus top 12 at minimum talent in the league at your position, in my opinion, Keenan Allen's a top 12 wide receiver, it's going to happen. And he's never been a prolific touchdown scorer, but you don't think playing with the best quarterback of his career is going to help that cause? I think the range of outcomes in Keenan Allen in this year, if he plays the full season, is legitimately like wide receiver 2 or 3 as a high end and like wide receiver 8 or 9 as his low end. In all honesty, he's the safest wide receiver that you can get at that 2-3 to mid third round turn. And he might go a little bit lower in your home leagues because people are going to take the Justin Jeffersons. People are going to take the AJ Browns. People are going to take the more quote unquote hyped up names. Maybe even CeeDee Lamb goes ahead of him in home leagues. He's currently going off the board ahead of him in Underdog. I think Keenan Allen just severely being underrated, and he's kind of been that guy his whole career that people just don't want to give the credit that he deserves. But yet, when we constantly see this guy catching 95 passes, 1,100 yards, and 7 touchdowns a year, he finally gets his credit by the end of the season. Then we completely forget what we learned going into the next season. But yeah, I think Keenan Allen's going to have the best year of his career this year with Justin Herbert.
Yeah, I totally agree on the Keenan Allen call. If you can somehow start your home league drafts with some of these guys we've talked about in round 1 to 2 and get Keenan Allen as like your wide receiver 1. If I started my draft right now, and I probably won't because I'm picking at the end of the round, but if you had an early round pick and you could start your draft with like Alvin Kamara, get, Najee Harris on the way back, and you could get Keenan Allen as your wide receiver 1 with those 2 running backs to start your team. Phenomenal type of value that you could get there. So let's move on to the round 4 ADP, and we'll try and go a little bit quicker on these ones, but we got to get those high-end picks need to have in-depth analysis because those ones really matter. So round 4 ADP, you guys can see it on the screen right now. Danny, if you didn't pick him, I was going to pick him. So who did you pick as your best value of round 4?
Quick thing I'll say on this is that this is where you start seeing the huge jumps in our comparative value to ADP. We're talking about in the first round, like my best ADP value was a guy that was going, I had ranked 2 picks ahead of consensus. But this next guy I'm going to talk about, Brandon Ayuk, wide receiver from the San Francisco 49ers. He is currently my wide receiver 18, 38th overall player. ADP has him, get this, wide receiver 24, 48th overall. You were getting him a near 1 round discount from where I personally would take him. I personally would take him in the early 4th round. He's currently going off the board in the early 5th round. And I truly believe this is a player that might even be going lower in your home league.
61 on home league. So he's 48th overall in Underdog. I knew you were going to ask that. I knew you were going to say that. So he's going off the board at wide receiver 25, 61st overall in terms of home league aggregate ADP data. So if you can get this guy in the 5th round, which is definitely going to be possible in your home league, then that's a smash pick already. So go ahead. 23
pick discrepancy where I have him versus where your home leagues might take him. And I know, what the heck? Am I obsessed with the San Francisco 49ers? I mean, I love Trey Lance. You guys sort of saw the quarterback rankings video yesterday. I just talked about George Kittle. How can I have another San Francisco 49ers player as a guy I love? But when it's Brandon Ayuk, it's hard not to love this guy. If you guys follow Matt Harmon via Reception Perception, he puts out a phenomenal basically data tracker where he goes, watches these guys on film, tracks each one of their routes, and determines the success rate of their routes. I know we've been referencing it all offseason, but I just kind of want to explain the process. Brandon Ayuk was one of the most surprising players of his projections. And if you guys see it on the screen, I mean, he had this guy statted out as an 88th percentile wide receiver against man coverage and an 86th percentile wide receiver against press coverage. As a rookie, stepping in, I mean, this guy was just off the charts right away. And the first thing that he said going into this profile was Brandon Ayuk is without a question my biggest riser coming out of the charting of the 2020 season. I came in expecting good things. I walked away from Ayuk's film believing this player has the potential to become a superstar at the wide receiver position. And if you were going to trust one fantasy football analyst in predicting a fantasy football wide receiver's ascension, Matt Harmon is the guy you trust them with, because this guy has predicted the breakouts of countless wide receivers in the past. Heck, DK Metcalf just last year, he said after his first year in the league that DK Metcalf was in store for huge things as a sophomore, and basically seemed as bullish on DK Metcalf as what I see right here with Brandon Ayuk. And if you guys can see his route distribution, this guy was basically a lead at every single route apart from the flat. But for a rookie wide receiver to step in, be as nuanced, as crisp, as explosive as Brandon Ayuk was out of the stretch, is just phenomenal to think about. And You're currently getting this guy off the board as a wide receiver 3 on your team when he was legitimately averaging, get this, more points per game last year when he got the opportunity than DJ Moore. DJ Moore, a wide receiver 2, one of the guys I've been as high on as anybody in the industry, a guy who was top 11 in receiving yards on the year. Brandon Ayuk was averaging more points per game down the stretch than DJ Moore. So I can't say anything now that I truly haven't said in the past, but all you guys need to know when going into your draft is that if Brandon Ayuk is making it to you in the 5th round and you don't take him, you may as well just unsubscribe from the channel.
Yeah, and I know there's plenty of concerns with Brandon Ayuk. I promise you, his ability, what he showed as a rookie, the fact that he was a rookie doing this, will trump all. I know everybody is concerned. Well, Deebo Samuel missed most of the year. George Kittle missed most of the year. The fact of the matter is, and I talked about this when I discussed Brandon Ayuk versus Deebo Samuel in the which wide receivers get the most valuable targets, a Brandon Ayuk target is 24% more valuable than a Deebo Samuel target based on the routes that they run. Brandon Ayuk is a possession alpha receiver. He runs deep routes. He runs, the routes that move the chains. Deebo Samuel is a gadget player. He runs, bubble screens. Last year, I tweeted this out yesterday. David Johnson had a higher depth of target than Deebo Samuel did last year. And David Johnson is a running back. So basically what you need to think is all 3 of these guys can coexist in the offense, especially if Trey Lance comes in and is the quarterback that we think he can be. This is more of a bet on the talent of Brandon Ayuk. I know people are going to be hesitant because he is going relatively high in drafts, but I promise you, just bet on the talent. What he did in year 1 was special. And you can make all the excuses for other players that didn't do what Brandon Ayuk did in year 1, but the reality is when those guys were out of the lineup, this guy was a wide receiver 1 in fantasy, and he produced. That's all you can really ask for out of a rookie wide receiver, because guys like Michael Pittman Jr., Henry Ruggs, they didn't produce despite having better situations in terms of target competition. And Brandon Ayuk had Nick Mullins as his quarterback for most of this stretch. So yeah, fact of the matter is this guy's undervalued in my opinion. Even as a 4th round pick, I still would take him there every single day of the week. And like we said, you can get him in the 5th, 6th round of your home league. So if he's going to be a guy that you can get in the 5th, 6th round, and you could come away with 2 stud running backs, 2 stud receivers, and Brandon Ayuk in your drafts, you're laughing all the way to the bank.
He is currently the 402 on my board. The 402. All right. If you're talking in comparison, that's Julio Jones range. That's like just after the CD Lamb, just after the Keenan Allens. I mean, it's just remarkable what this guy is able to do. So I am excited. I am ecstatic, and I cannot wait to see Brandon Ayuk end up with a 1,200-yard, 10-touchdown year. People are going to say, why did we fade Brandon Ayuk? Because they're going to realize on the field in 2021 that this guy is a legitimate talent at the wide receiver position. So can't get enough of this guy. We can get on to the next guy, though, and that's going to be your pick for value of the 4th round. Take it away with probably the most slept-on running back in the early portions or mid portions of the draft. And this is a guy who was RB4 last year, but people act like he legitimately busted on your teams. Take it away with David Montgomery.
I see. Here's the big one for me. Like, how is Clyde Edwards-Helaire going ahead of this guy? Because Clyde Edwards-Helaire legitimately busted for fantasy, and we're taking him over David Montgomery, who was a league winner, which to me doesn't make any sense, because if there's one thing we can count on in fantasy football, it's recency bias. So how is David Montgomery going behind Clyde Edwards-Helaire? Here's why. Because David Montgomery is fantasy oatmeal. That's what I called him last year. People don't think he's very good. People think he's just a volume play. That's, what people think he is. But the reality of the situation is that currently my RB16 in my rankings, 32nd pick overall. This is a guy I would spend an early 3rd round pick on. He's currently going off the board 42 overall, RB18. So this is a guy you're consistently getting in the 4th round. All we've heard from Bears camp is the fact that this guy is going to be the dude. He's going to get 20 carries. That's what Matt Nagy said. Again, a lot of people dissected that and they're like, well, you can't actually give a running back 20 carries per game. Regardless, they plan to feature the guy, and Tariq Cohen was the big concern, right? At the end of last year, we were like, okay, David Montgomery was great, but Tariq Cohen's coming back next year. Well, Tariq Cohen is not healthy. He is not a guy that is going to be on the field right away. They're calling him a week-to-week guy rather than a guy who's days away from an ACL tear. This is a small running back who was inefficient to begin with. So if he's going to lose any kind of explosiveness, he's already going to be, a liability for them to have on the field. That 74% opportunity share that David Montgomery had last year, and again, that was over the course of the whole season, not just the stretch when Tariq Cohen was out. is repeatable, in my opinion. It's completely repeatable. And based on Cohen still being out, based on the fact that Damian Williams is there, but he's going to be a backup running back again, on the DeAndre Swift point, they're not going to just field David Montgomery and have nobody behind him. That's not how the NFL works. Matt Nagy's already spewing all that trust in training camp, and everybody, their other big concern was, well, the schedule was so easy for David Montgomery. Well, here's the thing. This guy was legit commanding targets last year. Top 3 in route participation. He ran the most routes in the NFL last year. And Christian McCaffrey was injured, and some of these other guys that run a lot of routes were injured, but most overall routes run in the NFL last year. And that can help him overcome a bit of a tougher schedule than he had towards the back end of last year. And again, this is a guy that's going to catch passes. This is a guy that's going to get the ball in the red zone, and that can help you overcome a hard schedule. And not only that, but David Montgomery was actually good last year. One of the best, most elusive running backs in the NFL. We saw him take an 80-yard play to the house, which I never thought I'd see from David Montgomery based on his college film. He legitimately was just a better running back last year. And it all started with the fact that he said he was shedding weight going into last season, and he got more explosive. He got more elusive. He got faster. And that's really exciting to see. And I think we're hearing that out of some other running backs this year. So it might be something to pay attention to if it proved well for David Montgomery. And Danny's smiling because Zeke Elliott is one of those guys. I believe also Miles Sanders said something about the fact that he's shedding weight or something like that too. So
and Chase Edmonds is both gaining weight and shedding weight. So
yeah, he's getting bigger but shedding weight or whatever the hell he said. So either way, this is the cheapest workhorse in fantasy. And if you get, I would say this is the best case scenario for people who are drafting David Montgomery. If you are like me, you have the 9th overall pick or a late first round pick, you get a Devontae Adams to fall to you in the first round, and you draft Antonio Gibson, Najee Harris, Jonathan Taylor on the way back. You can go back in the 3rd round where he's going to be on the board in the mid 3rd round, take David Montgomery as your RB2. And you got a stud wide receiver 1, stud running back 1, and David Montgomery, who's probably going to be a top 10 running back this year at a 3rd round price and potentially even a 4th round price.
And people wonder every year, oh, well, why are people still going 0 RB? Like, like, I don't understand it. Why are they avoiding the top running backs? Well, for one thing, if you could start your draft, let's just say hypothetically, like the Antonio Gibson's off the board, the Najee Harris is off the board. Let's say you start your draft Devontae Adams and Stephon Diggs, and then you go back in the 3rd round or the 4th round, wherever David Montgomery's falling at that point, according to ADP, and you can get him as your RB1, where he's currently being completely disrespected by the industry, first off. I mean, this is a guy that I think his range of outcomes, in all honesty, is like RB6 or 7.
I think he could be a top 3 running back, dude. Like, legitimately. Yeah. Like, the way that they're talking about him, the way that he was used last year, the usage was just so insane. Like, he was being used like he was Dalvin Cook last year. And I don't think he's as talented as Dalvin Cook, but I also don't think he's not talented. Like, this is not a bad volume situation. This guy looked good last year. This was not a guy that was force-fed volume like James Robinson. I think this is a guy that's legitimately a top, 15 to 10 talent in the NFL at running back based on what I saw last year. So overall, this is a guy that I'm completely targeting. And I know for a fact he's going to go later in your home leagues than a lot of people. Maybe he goes a bit earlier because people remember the back half of the season. There's a chance that happens as well. But like Danny said, this is a guy that's completely disrespected right now and is a great value in the 3rd round and in the 4th round, like we said, that you can sometimes get him there.
And it's funny because I mentioned with your Najee argument, I'm like, yeah, would we be at all shocked if Najee Harris had a David Montgomery-like season this year? Well, David Montgomery could have a David Montgomery-like season this year as well.
Right, right.
Yeah, no, now we can head on to the honorable mention of this round. And that's going to be a guy that you're probably getting at his lowest value since his rookie year, which is remarkable to talk about. One of the best wide receivers of all time in this regard. But he's shifting teams this offseason. So take it away with Julio Jones, and I can add on with it.
Yeah, Julio Jones is a guy that typically we don't like to bet on bounce back candidates coming that are older players, but this is Julio freaking Jones we're talking about. This is one of the best receivers that's ever played football. He's still going to be Julio Jones. He's still going to be able to command targets. His presence alone is going to open up the offense for A.J. Brown and Derrick Henry. This offense will be one of the top 3 to 5 scoring offenses in the NFL, in my opinion, because we have Ryan Tannehill, who's extremely efficient. We have those 3 freaks of nature that you have to defend on a weekly basis. How the hell do you stop this offense with Julio Jones and A.J. Brown on the outside? Derrick Henry as the guy that's pushing the ball up the middle. Julio Jones might have his most touchdowns too. I think that is a big time underreported or underappreciated part of this move to a new team is the fact that he's not the primary red zone option in the offense. Derrick Henry is the primary red zone option in the offense. And we saw with guys like Jonnu Smith last year, we saw with even Corey Davis in the red zone, the Titans like to get freaky. They like to do a lot of weird stuff.
They love it.
Misdirection, read options, RPOs. they're going to do that stuff again this year, even without Arthur Smith, who's now the Falcons head coach. And Julio Jones can take full advantage of the fact that Derrick Henry, the defense, is going to be focused on stopping him in the red zone, not stopping Julio Jones like it's been for the past 10 years in Atlanta.
Yeah, absolutely. And the points we make about teammates going at the top of our drafts, you got the Julio, you got the Chris Godwins and the Mike Evans, the CeeDee Lambs and the Amari Coopers. What we look for is, if we're going to take 2 teammate wide receivers high in our drafts, they need to be part of insanely efficient, insanely.
It wouldn't shock me if those 3 offenses are the best 3 offenses in the NFL next year.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And when you're talking about a future Hall of Famer, the leading wide receiver in yards per game across their career being a 4th-round pick, it is just absolutely remarkable to think about. Because even when he was on the field last year, like, Julio Jones showed no signs of slowing down. He was a very good wide receiver in both fantasy football and real life. He was just dealing with multiple ailments. I do think healthy, good offseason, new motivation on a new team. I do believe we're going to see a good Julio Jones. And I would be shocked if we're not talking about an 1,150-yard, 1,200-yard plus wide receiver this year. And if you're getting that in the 4th round, that's absolute value.
Yeah, and I think he could have 9 or 10 touchdowns, which we haven't been able to say about him in a couple of years. So the only thing I will say about Julio Jones is the fact that he is kind of banged up right now. So we'll have to continue to monitor that. We'll check in on that going forward. And obviously, if he is, actually dealing with injuries, we'll have to move him down our boards. But as of right now, being healthy going into week 1, he's still a big time target of mine in the 3rd, 4th round where he's currently going. So I hope you guys did enjoy that. We went pretty long on this one, but these are the important picks. You got to go long on these.
Sir.
For the top 4 rounds, these are where you build the foundation for your team. I know that's a cliche thing to say, but it is really true. It's also where you can win your league. Like, if you find a good value, if you get a 3rd round player that should have went in the 1st round based on where they finish in the season, that's going to help you win leagues. We saw what guys like Todd Gurley did a couple years ago. We've seen what guys even that went in the 1st round last year, guys like Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, and Alvin Kamara. They all went in the 1st round, but they were league-winning type of running backs, and that's exactly what you want. So if you guys enjoyed this video, as always, like, comment, subscribe to the channel if you are new. We will be coming back at you next Saturday with rounds 5 through 8 in terms of our must-draft players by round. This one will definitely see some more variance between ADP and where we have them ranked, so stick around for that. And if you want to support us in any way, you can go ahead and do so by going to underdogfantasy.com. You can use some of the advice that we gave you in this video, put it into action right away. Use promo code FSE when you sign up. You will get access to both of our draft guides, our rankings, our sleepers, our busts, all of our dynasty content that we've done over the past offseason. And you guys can also get $25 on top of your minimum $10 deposit to go ahead and use right away on the Underdog Fantasy site. Comment any of your league punishment ideas down below. That contest is ending soon. We will be giving away 1 listener league spot and a free draft guide to whoever has the best league punishment. There is no limit on how many league punishment ideas you submit. So if you want to be in a league with us, this is the best way you can do it. Just go ahead and give us some league punishment ideas. Whatever one we select will be in the listener league, guaranteed.
Yep, absolutely. And hope you guys enjoyed. We'll see you back tomorrow. Peace out, y'all.